Justine. So as I mentioned, Justine not only was a student who was a student in Jeff's class, so she's familiar with PBL from that perspective. She also is a practicing pharmacist, so she's going to tell us a little bit about how that has helped her when she's a practicing pharmacist. And she's also, please take advantage of what is it that you would need to do if you were implementing this to make sure that you had tutors that were as well trained, well prepared, and willing to come back time and time again to facilitate this. So please join me in welcoming Justine. I'll give you this.
Okay.
So, and Justine is very open to having questions, so please.
Yeah, because Steve pretty much asked me everything I had planned to say, so I'll accept any of your questions. Lisa had just asked me how would I ensure that all my classmates when I was a student would do the work. Well, I pretty much just worried about myself because I had to answer all the learning objectives myself. So as long as I did all the work and I was prepared, then I was confident going into the tutorial that I could have a good discussion. And so if anyone didn't do the work, well, all the rest of us were prepared enough to give them the answers, and they would just be lacking on their participation scores. So I wasn't really worried about anyone else but myself when I was a student going in. Do you have any other questions for me?
What I had asked before, just now, was how did Jeff present this to you when you first saw it as a student that made you feel like it was a safe learning environment? Because it's very, very, very scary.
Yeah, we were all terrified. I am not joking. They give him a lot of trouble because they're very scared about it. But just that reassurance that the tutor was there and was going to make sure you're not going to miss anything important was just very reassuring. Like, it doesn't matter what you came up with. I mean, it does. You were going to leave feeling confident that you knew the answers to what he was expecting on an exam. But after that first shot, you get the hang of it, and your confidence grows after that first tutorial. So, yeah.
So aside about being a little nervous for him when it first introduced, did it feel a little candy-coated at first, and it just it's just another way of presenting the content, or did you actually see it as authentic and real learning?
No, I thought it was very authentic. Like, we were presented with mini cases throughout our couple years, but there was always something given to us, like here's the question that you need to answer, or here's the article you have to appraise. We've never done anything just from scratch. Like, here you go, take it, go run for it.
So did that meet his objective of you are going to be on your own in 6 or 8, 10 months, whatever it is? Did it feel?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It couldn't be anything closer to what I do right now. Because nobody's giving me any guidance, and nobody's finding me the article in real life. So I really do think it translates, at least in my practice. Any other questions?
I have a question, Justine.
Yeah.
How would you go about, as an instructor who's thinking of implementing PBL, what advice would you give an instructor who's about to implement PBL in attracting tutors?
In attracting tutors?
Yeah, to come and, like you,
Yeah.
other than their remuneration.
Yeah,
Like,
so
what would be
there's
the incentive,
obviously
right?
that. For me, I feel like it keeps me up to date because each year Jeff adds in, oh, look, there's a new article that came out on hypertension. He added that in. I'm like, oh, great. I didn't know about that article. That's awesome. It's keeping me up to date. Plus, like, I just enjoy teaching. You know, like I teach dance, I tutor, so this is just really an enjoying thing for me to do. Yeah. I don't know how else you would attract them. He just sent out a mass email, right? Saying, hey, are any of you interested? And yeah, that's how he got me.
And in fairness, it wasn't mass. Like it
Okay, sorry.
I'm trying to, no, because I want to make it, and I'm not trying to like, clearly try to bring Justine back. This is my retention strategy, but it's targeted. So what I do is, before we had any graduates of the program, it was very targeted friends of mine who were practitioners, people who maybe were involved in PBL and that type of thing that I'd go after. And then I might have to expand it a tiny bit more to the people like, I hope they make a good tutor. But it's been wonderful because ever since the graduating class is now available and I can go to graduates of our program who know it from a student perspective, I tap some people on the shoulder. So it's not just I send it out to everybody. I am selective, Justine. That's right. So you're selling yourself short. It wasn't mass. I mean, I was like, oh, Justine's involved. That's perfect. Because it's key. Like, it's always a balance as the instructor going, I need 15 tutors. That's a lot. And it's like, you get an email from someone, I'd love to be a tutor. And I'm like, I don't think they're going to be a good tutor, but they're a body. You have to resist that, okay? Make sure that you pick the right person for it. So I just want to clarify. It's not like I send it out on like, some type of like job mine. Hey, come be a tutor. But anyway, sorry.
Are there any particularly difficult situations you run into as a tutor that you can advise us on?
I wouldn't call them like extremely difficult or anything, but you generally have like one student who doesn't really want to participate, and you have to find a constructive way of telling them, hey, you need to participate more if you want to succeed in this, without actually giving that to them. I don't like telling them how to run this tutorial, but you just have to sort of guide them in little ways just to help them along. Yeah, but there's always one, and I try to give them that feedback at their midpoint assessment. But yeah, I ask other group members, hey, like encourage discussion from some members that aren't speaking up, take lead in a discussion, that sort of thing. Yeah, I think that's the only real trouble I run into.
So I'm curious about the assessment. Mm-hmm. So you do a midterm and a final, but are you also like tracking for every class and or giving feedback every class, or are you are you kind of like looking at the rubric and then like looking for a progression, or is it like when you give the midterm feedback, is that for one tutorial or is that for a series of tutorials, or how does all of that work?
So our midterm right now is based on the first two, I think, right? So it's not very much, to be honest. I give them group feedback at the end of each tutorial. And then at the midpoint, Jeff gives us the option of like doing individual feedback, but I like to give them individual feedback on the rubric so they can actually see like this is the area that you're being assessed and this is how I thought you did and this is how you can improve it. And then I just track their progression. Yeah, and so like on the cases, I mark their names down. I'm like, okay, this is where this person contributed. Oh, this person was leading the discussion here. This person did a great job critically appraising, so I know what to put on their assessment. Make sense?
Thanks. Yeah.
Okay.
So to get 15 tutors, for pharmacy, you guys got it. For us, I know that would be fairly difficult. So how does the conversation go with the employer saying, hey, look, I'm going to be a tutor for this. I guess it's once a week in the afternoons. How's your conversation, or maybe some of your peers that are tutors, like, how does that conversation usually go?
That's a great question because I don't really know how anyone else does it. So maybe Jeff can say a little more on that. But my employer is so easygoing and so flexible. I just say, hey, Chris, I need a couple hours on Thursdays to do this course. He's like, great, go for it. Because right now I'm only working like 33 hours a week anyways. So this just helps me get to my full-time hours, the way I see it. So I can't talk for anyone else. I don't know how they go about that.
Yeah. So, and it's funny. So in pharmacy, I think there's a lot of, let's put it this way. I would say if you're an individual in pharmacy who is motivated to be involved at the university level and training others, we're lucky in pharmacy that there generally is a way to make it work, right? So some employers are happier. So for example, if you're at a teaching hospital or places like that, or certain excellent independent community pharmacies, they see value in that. Hey, I've got a staff member who's actually a tutor at the university, and that's seen as valuable. Again, especially teaching hospitals and things like that would be. So I'll be honest with you, as Justine would say, I don't know much more about how tutors do it. I remember how I used to do it, and it was pretty much that. I would talk to my boss and say, this is really important for my career development. You know, would you help support me? And I need to be, so we run the tutorials every single year. We've run them Thursdays at 3:30 till 6:30. And that way I can reassure all my tutors it's not going to change. They've tried to a few times. The curriculum committee will come back, oh, Thursday at 3:30. No, I'm a very happy to work with you on virtually everything. I think, sorry, someone just said that before too. Well, thank you for sharing that opinion with me, but that's not going to happen. And the reason is, see, that's, I jumped straight to that comment. So I value your opinion. That's what I've got to start saying to them, because normally I would, and I always value their opinion, but in this case, I push back. And it's because I want my tutors to know, you know, I hope they come back and they can always tell wherever they're working, even if they change jobs, this is really important to me. And Thursdays at 3:30. So again, generally I would say that's probably, except for a weekend, maybe probably one of the easier times. It's the end of the day, so maybe get out a little bit early and have someone provide coverage. And that's why we intentionally choose that time. So when you're designing the course, if you are going to implement PBL, that might be one way to work with the brilliant people. Don't get enough recognition at your faculties, probably like ours, who design the schedule. Right? And I talk with our schedulers more than anything to make sure I have enough rooms, but then also to make sure that I get a very consistent time for that tutorial time so I can support my tutors and try to make it as easy as possible, because it isn't easy, Steve, but that's how we typically do it in pharmacy anyway.
Yeah, and I very much appreciate that it's stable.
Yeah.
And I work the mornings. I work 9 to 2:30, and then I just drive over and do 3 hours of that tutorial.
I have a question, actually. How long is it to train a tutor? Is it a 1 week process? Is it a 3 hour?
We did like 1 or 2 couple hours sessions, and that was it. I mean, it was pretty easy for me. I had just been out of school, and I just did it as a student. So I kind of knew what his principles were and what to expect, but it wasn't very much. It wasn't very long.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's great. And so, Justine, that's the beauty. If you can track former grads, it's a lot easier as the coordinator then. I don't have to cover what is PBL with her. I don't have to go through how does a tutorial look. I don't have to go over what is a learning objective. Why is it important you don't give the learning objectives. I don't have to do that stuff with someone who's a grad of the program. What I'm doing is more, how do you support a student? What are the difficult tutorial circumstances you might come across? How might you work around that? What are some strategies I would encourage to use to get a student out of their shell, those types of things? How do you give effective feedback? How do you use our assessment rubrics? When do you escalate a situation to me? Like that type of stuff, kind of like what you do with TAs. That's what I could focus on with people who know about PBL. If it's not a PBL person who's ever done PBL and I'm going to bring them in to do a tutorial session with me, it probably would be at least a 3-hour session, but it would probably be a 3-hour session, and then I would follow up with them after the very first tutorial and make sure, look, how'd it go? What happened? I would do the brainstorm. I make sure they reflect on their experience as well. So at least 3 hours, but I can probably get away with an hour and a half or something like that for someone who's a grad of the program anyway.
Can I just add something? So I'll just add that, having worked with Steve and brand new TAs and stuff, it would have been useful to have done like a PBL exercise, kind of like what we did here with them, so that because they never would have experienced it as a student and how uncomfortable it may feel, but go through the whole process. Like I'd want to do do a case with them, and where they go, maybe research it a bit and come back, like maybe it's a simplified case or something, but something so that they go through the full process and do like the debrief and the reflection, so that they have some idea what I'm expecting them to do with the students. in the tutorial because yeah, I don't think it was abundantly clear to the the TAs that we trained. I mean, we didn't do this model, but it was, if we did it again, for people who weren't in PBL, I'd want to kind of run through it once with them at least.
Yeah.
So as a student, you knew that you had 6 hours of protected time each week to do this.
Yeah.
To this independent prep or this independent work. Mm-hmm. Did you actually make a point of saying, I am going to do 6 hours of work?
No. But I knew that that's what was expected. And I knew what 6 hours of work for me looked like.
Okay.
And I'm sure the first tutorial I went over that, to be honest. So,
By like, you did 20 hours?
no,
Or-
probably like 8. I probably spent like a whole day on it. My Saturday was dedicated to like preparing that tutorial or something. But never did I say, oh, I'm going to do my 3 hours here, my 3 hours there, kind of thing. So I don't know.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that, like, I think that's a challenge with designing cases or writing cases, in that, like, to have the appropriate scope so that it's not, it doesn't, take 20 hours to do. Mm-hmm. That, when you're, and that's a challenge of writing cases, I think. And on that point, like, some disciplines have, maybe some more ready access to cases that exist, or, Jeff having, like a clinical practice where you can draw from that. But, some other disciplines might not have that as easy, and, like just writing a case up isn't a trivial matter in and of itself. Like, it's a fair bit of work to do that. So, like, I think that's something not to be underestimated is, like, once you get it dialed in and getting the scope dialed in, but that might take a little bit of doing, because I'm sure the first case you wrote, probably wasn't ideal.
It's perfect.
I'm not surprised.
I'm sorry. And just a lot on that's a very important concept. And just to reiterate again, I don't know if it came through clearly enough. That case I wrote for you here, from my experience, that should take about 4 to 6 hours of independent time. And I think if you spend 4 to 6 hours, you should get that to the right depth. So I intentionally made that case to give you an example of what I would anticipate take about 4 to 6 hours. And having said that, though, that, like, again, it might be if it was the first time you're doing it, you might be like Justine, you might go, oh, I better do 8 or 10 then. But I think once you're familiar with the process and you go through and be more self-directed and resourceful, I think it should take about 4 to 6.
Yeah, and I'd like to comment on that too. It is a lot of work to write a case. A couple of comments. One thing is that once you do write it, you can use it for years and years. And as you use it, you become more knowledgeable about the case, you become more knowledgeable about possible responses from the students, and it becomes even better and better. It's like, I guess, a nice bottle of wine, maybe. The other thing is, I forgot what I was going to say now. Writing the case, yeah, it's a big investment, but it pays off. I'll think of it. I'm sorry, forgot.
I have a question. I'll pass it over to you. How driven were you by the marks on the rubric as opposed to the learning or the case, developing the case or solving the case as a student? I was curious whether you get quibbles over, I should have gotten this on the rubric, or why didn't I said this? Why didn't you give me that mark?
Yeah. The way Jeff set it up, I don't know if he's still saying it this way, but basically you're expected, like, if you do everything you can, like, you're doing just fine, you're going to get satisfactory. So a regular person's just going to get that satisfactory. You're going to have to do something. pretty amazing to get that number 4. So that's kind of just what I came in expecting. I'm going to get a 75 on this. So I'm just going to focus on learning what I need to know to write the exam to the depth that Jeff would expect. And we kind of get a sense of what he expects on his exams now too. So I don't know. I kind of knew which areas to focus because, Jeff doesn't like guidelines. So let's tear apart the guidelines. So we kind of knew where to go with that. So.
Okay, thank you.
So after you set your learning objectives and you did all of your independent learning and you came back to discuss it, you weren't allowed to bring your computer or your cell phone.
I was.
Okay, so when you brought your computer and your cell phone, did you actually bring anything on paper as well?
No, my group was allowed to have computers.
Okay.
It wasn't until after that he came up with the academic integrity problem. So the groups after me had to bring in paper, but no, I just had my computer. All my notes, everything was on the computer.
So then the follow-up, if you had known, so if you were doing it and you weren't allowed to bring your computer, would you have wanted to bring everything you've ever learned with you, or were you okay with just summarizing your own notes and bringing them in?
I would have been stressed out for sure, knowing that I couldn't just access anything I wanted. If, say, I got stuck for some reason in the middle of tutorial. But yeah, I would want to print all the articles that I looked up.
Like all of the article, like the whole article?
Yeah, I would. Because, someone asks you about the method, right? They're like, oh, I didn't like the inclusion criteria for this. You're going back and you're looking at it, right? And my students do. They bring the articles. And then all the notes you made, bringing them. So yeah, you're bringing like a good 30 pages with you, plus therapeutic choices and RX files and.
So they also bring their textbooks.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Catherine, just back on that point that I forgot. You might want to shy away from writing cases because you think it's too much work. But I found once you've written it, it's easier to use it because you've invested the time in investigating it, as opposed to perhaps buying a case from somewhere else and having to learn it on a more surface level. So I think it is very valuable to write your own cases. That's what I wanted to say.
Yeah, and I think probably like Oscar and probably Cheryl would probably agree. Like I know you guys have both written, many cases, but that it's easier as you go on. Like the first couple take a while, but then it gets easier as you write more. So you probably agree with that too, I imagine. Yeah.
And one final question for Justine from me. What skills do you call upon now that you learned as a result of doing your problem-based learning that you wouldn't have developed had you learned some other way? Is that
Probably just the process.
the process?
Yeah. Like I said before, had I gotten the same case I've just got a couple weeks ago in third year, I probably would have just dove in and tried to find the answer, right? I would say, yes, you can take that drug while you're pregnant, and that would have been the end. But after PBL, you really get a sense of, okay, what do I know? What don't I know? What do I need to know to answer her question thoughtfully? And really consider, okay, what's her history? What's her lifestyle? What does she value? And how can I apply this now to her?
How does that make you feel, Jeff? Did you hear that?
I love it. This was not set up. I mean, it sounded like him raving about me this morning. I had no input to that, so that's
All about Jeff. Okay, well, thank you very much, Justine, for sharing your perspective. What I wanted to do was just open it up to everybody here. If you are thinking about implementing PBL, one of the things I would like to know is what resources could we provide? what help might you need? Where do you think you're going to be stuck? Yes. Sorry. Training students. Tutors. Okay, so training tutors. Acquiring tutors. Is there any comments from Sorry, so we need
So-
training tutors.
Okay, so and maybe I'll say about the paying tutors. So we pay a paltry sum. Unfortunately, we don't pay enough in my mind, but we do get pharmacists. So I guess the argument is, well, I guess we do because we get some, but I think it's more because they love teaching us, not for the money. We pay a TA rate, a professional TA rate. So I can't remember if it's like $35 or something like that per hour. And what I wanted to do, because I wanted the tutors to understand that I know what they do is we can't pay what they're worth. And I used to call it an honorarium, right? So we pay $1,000 honorarium for being a tutor for a semester, because I like the sounds of that, as opposed to telling me, oh, I'm paying you $35 an hour. So, and honorarium sounds great, but now we can't use that, right? Because you can't invoice and for reasons like that. So I still kind of fudge it a bit and make it be enough hours. I'm telling them there's how many hours they're working to make it be $1,000. So that's what we pay. So it's 15 tutors and we pay $1,000. And then the grading TA is what I use as well. Because again, short answer, so I can't run it through a Scantron, and I need a professional to mark my grades. So I've pushed back again. I value your opinion, but I can't use a grad TA for this. I need a practicing pharmacist because, as I said, it's the rationale I want these students to work on. So there could be 5 answers for my short answer as long as it's structured correctly. So that works out to be the grading, I believe, it works out to be about 100 TA hours for 120 students for a midterm and a final. Okay, so 100 hours that we pay our grading TAs, and that's, again, a professional. I don't know how it is in other faculties, and I know it's strictly how do you enter into the monetary discussions. What I will say is that the Dean of Science within the past year, and I wish Carrie Bissonette was here because we had a teaching and learning symposium at School of Pharmacy, and Carrie, our teaching fellow, had told us that the dean, in no uncertain terms in science, has said that he would listen very favorably to any proposals for increasing the amount of active learning in the Faculty of Science. And a lot of that comes from above, right? So Faradin has said that that's something that they're really interested in. So now, so in other words, Carrie's saying now's the time. So if you're thinking about team-based learning or case-based learning or hopefully problem-based learning, now might be the time to approach and say, can we even do a pilot? And then, again, partner with CTE, and I've got a light grant to study a different aspect of my teaching, but maybe even look for a light grant to maybe do something, right? So you can study some of the outcomes to then show, hey, look at these outcomes, and so let's make sure that this is something that's sustainable. So those are some of my thoughts. And again, I agree that I was very lucky because I was brand new at the School of Pharmacy and there was nothing there, and I just made sure we did this from the beginning. Yeah, that's easy. It is harder, but not impossible to maybe think about some of that. So I know CT would help with some of that. I can talk about more specifics afterwards if you're interested. It is tricky, but I think not insurmountable maybe. And with recruitment, as I say, we intentionally get practicing pharmacists for our needs because the students really appreciate that. And again, if it's skill-based, I want to have the individuals with those skills to validate what the students are going through. So that's, and I recruit by grads, and then also anybody, we also have these things at the School of Pharmacy, anybody who's interested in teaching, they're like on a list, and then anytime these opportunities come up, we'll start with that list anyway. So that's how we recruit the tutors then.
So having done all that, on course evals, would you get any feedback that maybe goes beyond just outlier feedback, but may represent a modest theme of students feeling there isn't consistency, it was arbitrary between TAs, things like that. Do you still run into a bit of that after? Or?
Yeah, and I don't want to oversell this, but to be honest with you, no, I don't. I absolutely, we'll get individual ones, and Oscar showed the case-based feedback, and right, you spent too much time, you didn't spend enough time. Like, yeah, you get that, right? And as you say, some of the outliers, this is not a learning style for everybody. Just like didactic never resonated with me as a student. And then when I did PBL, this is what I needed. Same thing. I know some people are not PBL because, again, a lot of pressure even to perform in a tutorial setting, that makes people feel uncomfortable. So I don't. The theme I get back is much more consistent with what Justine's been saying, is that this is the best therapeutics module we had out of the 9. And again, it's that backhanded compliment. Wow, I don't even lecture. They love it more than anything I've ever done for them. But it's good. And so that is the theme that I'm getting, is that they really value this technique. And that's why I feel there's such value that, again, let's put it this way. It's consistent enough that our director of pharmacy is now telling us and encouraging us, hey, maybe we should start one or two of the other courses as PBL. So when the director who's responsible for these resources is saying, have you thought about doing IPFC 7 or 8 like this? I mean, that speaks volumes based on the feedback that we get. So no, generally it's been pretty good.
I have a question. How long or how many times would you have to teach PBL before you felt comfortable with it? My fear is that somebody might start it, doesn't go so well, and then they stop.
I think more important is the support. So for me, the support was the actual experience of doing it, and so I knew from the student side, as Justine, it's funny, your experience was a lot like how I went through as a student. Like, you know, at first going, holy crow, like, is this a good way to do it? Like, I'm kind of nervous. Or I've got the expert sitting right here, why aren't they just teaching me, right? So, and then gradually really embraced it. So I had the same thing. But going through it as a student, and I think that's what it was for me. But for someone who hasn't done PBL, who's thinking about doing it, this is what today's all about, right? Is to identify some supports. Clearly, people who are extremely enthusiastic. Like, again, I always thought I was enthusiastic till I met my man, Steve, and Oscar can hold his own too. So, but the point, and we're here to help. And so I think it's more, so, you know, for the planning, and as you've heard, it takes a long time to plan it. So plan it well in advance. Make sure you talk with resources, people who have done it before. You're welcome to come and sit in on a PBL tutorial. I bet you have a tutor who might allow you to sit in on a particular tutorial to see how it goes from that standpoint. And so we're helping that out. And then, again, any of us would probably be happy to debrief after the first time you do it. If as you say, you do it and you go, oh, that didn't work as planned, well, let's talk about it, right? Were there ways that we could have helped you do that? So that's the key, I think, is if someone's nervous about doing this, there are supports here, like CTE and us, and that's what I would say. And Jason might be saying the similar thing, but yeah.
No, I have a question directly for you as well around research. Are you doing any research questions?
Yeah.
You could just answer.
So,
Yeah, just answer that.
so the most applicable
Just repeat the question.
So repeat the question. So the question was, am I doing any research in this? So there's lots of PBL research that's out there, and as I mentioned, a lot of the issue with the current PBL research is it's not talking about this form of PBL. And I've actually gotten into some disputes with some peer reviewers who go, this isn't novel. And so this has been done a million times. I'm like, no, it hasn't. And I reply back, you know, clearly there's an issue here. And I value your opinion. That's a wonderful opinion, but you're wrong because it doesn't match. So the research I'm doing is actually, we have a bridging program. So the original class of pharmacists who went through have a bachelor's degree in pharmacy. And now we've switched, like other schools across Canada, have an entry to practice doctor of pharmacy degree. So we have a bridging program for the students who went through the bachelor's to upgrade to a PharmD. And essentially what we do, and I'm doing the therapeutics course of that, and you can imagine, like, it's hilarious, like the discussion, well, how are you going to run the course, Jeff? And I'm like looking at the course, like, are you serious? Like PBL, man, like, of course. So, and the issue is, it's at a distance. So we've got graduates who are in Alberta, BC, down in California. I want to go down, I was going to do a road trip down to, so I better go and personally inspect this. But so all over. And so we actually did closed loop PBL at a distance using Adobe Connect software. So it's face-to-face, you see the people, and you can actually have a PBL tutorial that goes through that. So that's the research I did, was to say, can you do this in that environment? And so we have a paper in press now talking about that. So I've been focusing more on that, because at least I could show that that's novel. And in fact, I still got some people saying, oh, it's been done, and it hasn't. I haven't done a whole lot, though, because when I see all of the research that's out there for studying PBL in a medical context, like there's loads, and the answer is still really gray. So I'll be honest, like I know my strengths and limitations. I'm not exactly sure how to get at, you know, a research question that'd be important enough that I think I could further the agenda that's on there, as opposed to maybe some of these novel techniques. If anyone has any ideas, I'm always looking for partnerships, but that's more what I've been studying then as it pertains to PBL.
I'm curious, how many people here are considering doing PBL? What resources would you like to avail
The big thing is going to be the tutors or TAs who will need to step into that role of tutors.
Okay.
Because having small groups meeting every week, can eat up a lot of TA hours.
And what faculty are you into?
I'm in the Department of Philosophy faculty and arts.
Oh, okay. Anyone else considering?
Our unit is moving more towards this, but the challenge I would have would be undergraduate courses I'm attached to are huge volumes of students.
Okay.
And it would be on another level. We're into the hundreds. But I wanted to learn about it because our unit as a whole, we want to think about how to be more intentional about integrating this into our program as a form of learning for our students.
Can I maybe
Yes,
be
please.
devil's advocate and say one potential creative solution for a large body of undergrads? What have you thought about maybe doing 2 streams? So have a stream of PBL and take a portion of individuals, and maybe students can self-select that, then say, I want to go in the PBL stream because I've heard great things about it, and then have people in the traditional, and then that sets up the research question right there, right? Because then you've got it. So that might be one option, right? Anyway, just my thoughts.
I guess, pharmacy, has there been any feedback from employers? Like, can they spot a PBL?
It's tricky because our program, the pharmacy program, is unique in that we are the only school in Canada that has a co-op pharmacy program, right? And so our student, there is, and I'll say like our grads are widely sought after because of their problem-solving abilities and real-life experience from co-op, and so it'd be very difficult to disentangle the skills from PBL that they get actually. I'd love to claim it all as PBL, but it's probably a lot the co-op too. Yeah.
Any other comments, questions? Yes.
I have a question from Oscar that's in the same department. What was the course that you developed as a PBL model?
No, I haven't developed any course for PBL. I'm thinking about it. Yeah.
So which course do you think that has more potential for fitting in this model? Resources. I know that there are many design engineering facilities and also the idea clinic
Right.
facilities available in our kind to work with
Right.
as the course project or designing your course that way.
Right.
I still have the struggle of thinking about the feasibility of working all of these components together.
Yeah. I think I'll answer your first question first, and then I'll make a comment. I'm thinking of implementing it in a graduate course, so I have a little bit more leeway than trying to do something in the undergraduate program. I was a director of curriculum development and led a visioning exercise to renew our mechanical engineering curriculum, and that committee came up with the engineering clinic, which was a curricular structure as opposed to a physical place like the Ideas Clinic, okay, that's quite different. What I'm talking about is a curricular structure that goes through the whole program as a staircase, if you will, as a practicum spine, right? Exactly like what you're doing with, I forget the acronym, IPFC, okay? And so if strategically the department decided to put in that structure, then to me, that's the logical place to incorporate PBL in a program. So I think my answer to that is it maybe can't just be a course, it has to be a curriculum decision, right? But I'm going to try it in it's actually a graduate diploma in design, so it's a series of 3 courses that's co-op, and that students who come off of co-op are required to write a case study. So I'm trying to pull all that together to see if I can make one of those courses just a strict PBL course and maybe use some of the cases that are sourced from previous co-ops as the PBL material, right? Now what I'm struggling with is the tutor piece. How do I pay for it? So, there's TA funds, right? My argument is for design, I'd rather have an experienced practitioner than a graduate student who hasn't been in industry. So so I would petition to access those TA, instead of having a grad student as a TA, I'd petition to have a practitioner like Justine from industry to come in, right? But then, the other question is, it's sort of chicken and egg, right? If you do have this program running, and then you have some students who graduate from it, and they're out there for 2 or 3 years, then you can go to those students, because then they know what you've done, right? But if you're just starting, how do you do that? Because the students aren't out there. So I don't know if that's helpful. Yeah.
Any final comments? Any comments from the group?
A couple of things. So just about the so comments about the like doing it for the first time and comfort level and stuff. So the one great thing with Steve was that he was comfortable with things not going as planned, and being able to adapt, and being willing to adapt, and like that, and being and reassuring the students that, hey, it's going to be okay. Like you're not going to get penalized for this. Like that like we're trying this for the first time. We're going to see how it goes, I think that was really helpful, and he's really enthusiastic, but it was also just being able to be flexible and being able to deal with things as they didn't if they didn't go as planned. Another thing just with so there's a number of people in the room who have done work with cases and the case method and that kind of stuff, and I think there's the difference between so cases, it's a spectrum. It's a continuum, and as Jeff was saying, problem-based learning isn't all defined the same way in the literature. Some people, are doing one thing, but it's not, the more, it's not the closed loop model, but they're still calling it PBL, and but it's a continuum, and you can have cases and case-based learning where you're just lecturing the case, and it's just an example. And I don't really see that any different than lecturing. Like, it's just an example. Like, okay, you're using a case, but you're just lecturing it. Like, you're not really adding value with it, apart from that it's real life, possibly. And where the value comes in, I think, is if it's given to students and that it's ill-structured and they're grappling onto the case and the challenge, and then coming up with some decision or analysis, and then justifying that. And with cases can be very structured, and very simple cases, and you can get a lot more complex cases that are a lot more ill-defined, where you don't know what the problem is. And I would argue that those more complex cases are a lot closer to PBL than the very, very structured cases where you're given a decision and you're just asked, is this the right one? Versus figuring out what the problem is in the first place, and then coming up with some plan of action to deal with it and justifying it. So I think there's potential opportunities with cases that you can get more unstructured cases and move towards problem-based learning. And just as with cases, it also depends how many you do. You know, if you're doing one for like one class and people are all uncomfortable with it, you know, it gets easier the next time they do it, you know. So maybe you don't have the whole course, but maybe you have a couple of times where they're, you know, getting used to it so that they're not just like, ooh, that was like really uncomfortable and I didn't like it. And just like, you know, with cases, if people who have introduced cases for the first time and it's the first time students have done a case, they're uncomfortable with it. So, you know, they need to be reassured and kind of structured for how to do that. And maybe Oscar and Cheryl might have some more comments about that as well.
I'll generally agree with Scott. I mean, cases are very flexible. I generally agree that cases are very flexible and, you know, they can be used as examples, but I think you have to take a little bit more strategic approach in using the case method, never mind the PBL method. What I found when I incorporated it into the machine design course is you just can't give one case because they don't know the method, right? They have to learn the method. So I ended up giving 4, and that was very beneficial by the end of it. So.
Alrighty, well, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us this afternoon. We're going to be sending out the slides, and as the group has said, we're very keen to work with you, provide you with support, so if you are interested, please get in touch with us, and we can work through, see what support you feel you need, and we'll find a way to get you started at some level or another. Okay, so please join me in thanking this group for